The cigarette had nearly burned to its filter. Nolan let it fall onto the gravel and carefully crushed it beneath his shoe. When Ethan found out, he stopped himself. When your husband found out, what happened? Tamber looked at him with hollow eyes. He didn't. The words barely carried. He doesn't know. She stared into the darkness. He still doesn't. The confession seemed to leave the air itself heavier. She folded her arms tighter. I've wanted to tell him so many times. I've stood outside his office. I've rehearsed the words while washing dishes. I've imagined every possible outcome. She laughed bitterly, and every single time I lost my courage. She looked back at Nolan. Now answer me. There was no anger in her voice, only bewilderment. How did you know? Nolan regarded her quietly. After a long pause, he said, "That isn't the important question." She frowned. It matters far less how the truth is discovered than what the truth asks of us once it stands in the room. She searched his face. He gave nothing away. She looked down again. I've hated myself for it. Her shoulders slumped. I told myself I was looking for comfort. I told myself I was confused. I told myself I was wounded. She slowly shook her head. But those things explain a choice. They don't excuse it. A tear slipped down her cheek. I was conflicted. I felt abandoned. I felt angry. I felt invisible. She looked toward the empty road, stretching into the darkness. And somewhere inside all of that. I became someone I never thought I could be. Her voice almost disappeared. I've spent years wondering whether one terrible mistake gets to define an otherwise ordinary life. The prairie answered only with wind. Nolan remained where he stood beside the sedan, listening without judgment, allowing her confession to settle into the silence before another word was spoken. The night had fully arrived now. The prairie seemed impossibly vast beneath the first scattering of stars. The lonely road disappearing into darkness in both directions. The cooling wind tugged gently at his rolled sleeves, carrying away the last traces of cigarette smoke. He folded his arms. His voice, when it came, was neither accusing nor sympathetic. It was measured. Tamber. She looked up. Do you understand what infidelity does? She opened her mouth. He gently lifted a hand. I don't mean the obvious consequences. I mean what it does beneath the surface. She remained silent. Nolan's gaze drifted toward the endless horizon. We often think infidelity is the breaking of a promise. It is, but that's only the beginning. He paused. It is also the breaking of certainty, the breaking of memory, the breaking of history. He stooped, picking up another small stone from the roadside. You know, when a window shatters, we notice the glass, we sweep the floor, we replace the pane. It looks repaired. He rolled the stone between his fingers. But trust isn't made of glass. It's made of memory. And memory doesn't replace itself. He looked at her again. A husband begins asking questions. he never imagined asking. When she smiled at me that evening, was she already carrying someone else's secret? When she kissed me goodbye, was she thinking of another man? When she said she loved me, did she still mean it? His voice remained calm. The affair eventually ends, but the questions, they often don't. The wind rustled through the cottonwood. He continued quietly. A man's confidence in the world is built from many things: his work, his purpose, the promises he keeps. But for many men, the deepest confidence comes from believing that home is the one place where he is completely safe. He looked toward the darkness stretching beyond the road. When that belief is wounded, it isn't merely jealousy. It isn't wounded pride. It is the unsettling realization that the place where he laid down his armor was never as secure as he believed. He lowered his voice. Something inside him often begins questioning not merely his marriage, but his own judgment. How could I not have seen it? What else have I misunderstood? Was I enough? He shook his head gently. Those questions are cruel because they ask a person to become both the victim and the judge. Tamber had begun crying quietly. She didn't interrupt him. Nolan wasn't speaking to condemn her. He was speaking with the careful precision of someone describing a wound. The tragedy, he continued, is that infidelity rarely injures only the one who is betrayed. It changes the one who betrays as well. It teaches them that they are capable of becoming someone they never believed they could become. And that realization can be just as frightening. Silence followed. Tamber lowered herself onto the edge of the open driver's door. Her face had gone pale. I know. Her voice trembled. I know. She covered her mouth. I'd spent years trying not to think about it. She stared into the gravel. I hate who I became. I hated the lies. I hated looking Ethan in the eyes. She shook her head repeatedly. I'd come home, and Trevor would have been standing beside me only an hour earlier. She closed her eyes tightly. I'd tell him about my day, even though he didn't ask. I can still remember every one of those conversations. They make me sick. She looked up at Nolan. I discussed myself. I don't know how else to say it. I don't deserve. Stop. The word was quiet. It wasn't harsh. It simply stopped her. She looked at him. Nolan's expression had not changed. Stop pitying yourself. She frowned. I'm not. You are. His voice remained remarkably gentle. Guilt and self-pity often wear the same clothes. They are not the same thing. She blinked. He continued. Guilt asks, how do I make right what I have done? Self-pity asks, what does this make me? He stepped closer. No human being has ever repaired a broken life by endlessly describing themselves as broken. She lowered her eyes. If what you said tonight is true, then your actions were wrong. They caused real harm. They require honesty. They require courage. But they do not require you to spend the remainder of your life worshipping your own failure. The words settled over her. She slowly nodded. I've never thought about the difference. Most people don't. He folded his hands together. Regret has purpose. Shame likes to pretend it has one. They are not friends. Another long silence passed. The prairie seemed impossibly quiet. Finally, Tamber looked at him. Why? He met her eyes. Why are you asking me all of this? She took one hesitant step toward him. Why Trevor? Why Ethan? Who are you? Her voice grew firmer. You didn't guess. You knew. She searched his face desperately. So tell me, what is this? Nolan inhaled slowly. When he finally spoke, his words landed with extraordinary calm. Your husband knows about Trevor. The world seemed to stop. Tamber stared at him. No, he does. She shook her head immediately. That's impossible. He's no. Nolan continued quietly. For quite some time, the color drained from her face. She took an involuntary step backward. No, she laughed once, a frightening laugh. No, that's impossible. She began pacing around the sedan. The gravel crunched sharply beneath her boot. No, no, if Ethan knew. She looked at Nolan. He would have left. She continued pacing. He would have confronted me. He would have screamed. He would have... Her voice caught. He would have said something. She turned back toward Nolan. When When did he find out? Who told him? Did Trevor tell him? Did someone from the clinic? Has he known for weeks, for months, for years? She waited desperately. Nolan remained silent. She moved closer. Answer me, please. How long? He said nothing. She searched his face for anything, any clue, any expression. Nothing. She turned away again, running both hands through her hair. This doesn't make sense. She spoke almost to herself now. If he knew. She stopped walking. Why would he stay? The question disappeared into the vast Wyoming night. For the first time since she had stopped beside the stranded sedan, the certainty she had built around her marriage, however fractured it had been, had begun to collapse, and in its place stood a single unbearable possibility, that the man she believed had never known had been carrying the truth alone. Tamber stood motionless beside the sedan. The wind had picked up. It swept across the empty prairie in slow, mournful breaths, carrying with it the scent of dry grass and the coming cold of night. The stars had multiplied overhead, indifferent witnesses to the silence that had settled between them. She searched Nolan's face. I need you to tell me how you know. Her voice had become small. If Ethan knows, she swallowed. Then how do you know? Nolan looked toward the dark horizon before answering. It isn't important. She stared at him. It is to me. No. He met her eyes. It only feels important because you're trying to understand the road. when you should be looking at where it ends. She frowned. I don't understand. I know. Another silence settled. Then Nolan spoke again. Just because I'm holding you accountable for your affair doesn't make your husband a good man. She blinked. His words seemed to arrive from somewhere she hadn't expected. I've met difficult people. He looked out into the darkness. I've met liars who could make honesty sound dishonest. I've met thieves who believed they were victims. I've met men who carried violence inside them so naturally they mistook it for confidence. He folded his hands together. And I've met cruel men. A breeze tugged gently at his loose tie. People often imagine evil announces itself. They think it has a loud voice, a frightening face. They imagine they would recognize it immediately. He slowly shook his head. The worst people I've ever known smiled easily. They remembered birthdays. They held doors open. They donated to charities. They knew exactly which version of themselves the world wanted to see. His eyes found hers again. I've encountered vile men in my life, more than I care to remember. He paused. But I have never met a man quite like Ethan. Tamber frowned. What are you talking about? The man you believe your husband to be. His voice remained calm. Exists only inside your memories. She stared at him. I don't. You've spent years mourning someone who no longer exists. He watched the confusion spread across her face. We often comfort ourselves by believing terrible people become terrible because something terrible happened to them. There are certainly people whose pain twists them, but there are others. He looked down at the gravel, whose character was always waiting. He picked up a small stone and rolled it between his fingers. Evil isn't always created. Sometimes it is simply revealed. Circumstance doesn't manufacture it. It merely gives it room to exercise its full strength. Tamber folded her arms tightly. No, you don't know him. Nolan regarded her quietly. No, I've only ever spoken to him once. She frowned. What? He nodded. You've only had one conversation with Ethan recently. It wasn't face to face. She felt the air leave her lungs. What are you talking about? He stepped toward the driver's door of the sedan where she stood. Without another word, he opened it wider and gestured toward her pickup parked beside them. You need to get back into your own vehicle. She didn't move. Nolan. His voice remained composed. Please. For reasons she couldn't explain, she obeyed, neither frightened nor entirely comfortable. She simply felt that whatever this man was about to say should not be heard from the passenger seat of his car. She crossed the gravel slowly. He walked with her. Neither spoke. The night had become unnaturally quiet. She opened the driver's door of her pickup. The familiar cardboard package still rested on the passenger seat, exactly where she had left it. Nolan stopped beside the open door. When you leave here, his voice carried a firmness she had not heard before. Drive directly to your mother's house. She looked at him. Do not go home tonight. seated together. Why? He looked at her steadily. Do you trust me? She hesitated. The question seemed impossibly large. Finally, she answered honestly. She drew a slow breath. I think I do. He nodded once. Listen to that feeling. She looked utterly bewildered. I don't understand any of this. I know, but sometimes understanding arrives after obedience. The wind stirred between them. Nolan looked toward the stars before speaking again. Love is one of the few things capable of multiplying whatever already exists inside a person. He spoke almost as though reciting something long remembered. In a virtuous heart, love deepens generosity. It teaches patience. It softens pride. It enlarges mercy. He lowered his eyes. But when love is poured into a heart consumed by selfish ambition, it does not redeem that heart. It feeds it. It becomes another possession, another instrument, another thing to exploit. His expression remained solemn. Affection invested in a person devoid of virtue can become nourishment for something monstrous. Tamber stared at him. What are you saying? He answered quietly. A few years ago, Ethan took out a substantial life insurance policy on you. She felt her knees weaken. No, he did. She shook her head repeatedly. No, he wouldn't. He said it was sensible financial planning. Nolan continued. His business has not been prospering. She looked up sharply. That's not true. It is. He has money. He had money. corrected gently. They are not the same thing. She laughed nervously. No, the company is successful. I've seen. You've seen what he wanted you to see. Her breathing became shallow. No, he travels. He signs contracts. Appearances can be financed. He spoke without raising his voice. Reality eventually collects the debt. Tamber looked toward the package lying on the passenger seat, then back at Nolan. None of it made sense. None of it could possibly be true. And yet, something deep inside her had begun to remember all the things she had quietly explained away over the years. The missing bank statements, the increasing secrecy, the unexplained frustration, the locked office, the late night phone calls that stopped when she entered the room. Nolan reached over and gently lowered the sedan's hood until it latched with a solid click. The sound echoed through the stillness. The last money he had, Nolan said quietly, he gave to me. She looked at him, confused. What? He didn't elaborate. Instead, he walked back to the sedan. He opened the driver's door, climbed inside, and started the engine. It turned over immediately. The headlights washed across the lonely road. Tamber sat frozen in her pickup. He lowered the driver's window. His face was calm. The package on your passenger seat. He nodded toward her truck. Take it to the police in the morning. She looked from him to the parcel. Don't open it. His words were measured. Just take it to them. She wanted to ask another dozen questions. Instead, only one sentence escaped. Her voice broke as she spoke. Love is a strange thing. She looked out across the dark prairie. It can keep mourning the person someone used to be, while standing beside the person they've become. For the first time that evening, Nolan allowed himself the faintest expression of sorrow. Then he gave a single nod. Without another word, he shifted the sedan into gear. The tires crunched softly over the gravel. The tail lights drifted farther down the empty road until they became two small red stars against the darkness. And then they too disappeared. Tamber remained inside her truck, alone beneath the immense Wyoming sky. The unopened package resting on the seat beside her, like a question she was no longer certain she wanted answered.